Welcome back. Over the weekend, the US shot down a Chinese balloon that had drifted over its territory in a sign of the tensions between the two countries. But while China and the US sometimes appear to threaten each other, the chances are that you are wearing something that was made in China and possibly designed in the US. It may be your clothes or your shoes or your watch. You know how closely intertwined the global economy is. And yet, what do companies do when there's a dispute between them across international borders? So, for an example, an iPhone is designed in California. It's put together in China by the company Foxconn, which is owned by a Taiwanese company. What happens when there's a dispute between all three of them or all four of them? This is where you have organizations that look at what is sometimes called private international law. It affects laws around families as well. Dr. Christophe Bernasconi is the Secretary General of the Hague Conference on Private International Law. They're about to have a big event here in Gauteng. Dr. Bernasconi, good afternoon to you, and thank you for your time. When we talk about international law, we're usually talking about disputes between countries, between nation states. What do you mean when you talk about private international law?
Good afternoon, and thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. So when we talk about private international law, we precisely don't talk about public international law, which is the body of law that would apply between disputes between states. When we talk about private international law, we still talk about international situations, cross-border situations, but situations that involve private people or commercial operators, companies, as you very well explained it in your initial example. And in those international situations of civil or commercial nature, you typically have three basic private international law questions that you need to answer. The first is, which court has jurisdiction or which authority has jurisdiction to hear a litigation arising out of this international situation of civil or commercial nature? Is it a court here in South Africa? Is it a court in the US or in China or somewhere in Europe? Who knows? The second question is, which law applies? Which substantive law? Which commercial law or which family law applies to the issue at stake? Is it, the domestic law of South Africa? Is it the domestic law of the US, of China, or somewhere in Europe? Who knows? Then the third question is a question on the recognition and enforcement of foreign judgments in civil or commercial matters. How can you go about enforcing a judgment, say, here in South Africa, that comes from another state? These are the three traditional private international law questions. And then the work of the organization that I represent, the Hague Conference on Private International Law, or the HCCH, as we call it these days, has added what I like to call a fourth dimension to the classic traditional private international law questions, and that's the issue of cooperation. Cooperation between states. How can you establish effective cooperation mechanisms between states at the administrative level, at the judicial level, or otherwise, to overcome the often very practical challenges that people face in those situations? Take the example of court proceedings taking place here in South Africa, and the defendant is, say, in the US. How do you serve process on the defendant in the US? If you don't have effective cooperation mechanisms in place, you have to go through very lengthy, complicated consular channels, which really can take a very long time. Or you establish an effective cooperation mechanism through one of our conventions, in this case the Service Convention, and you have a much faster way to transmit these requests for service and have them executed adequately. So that is, in a nutshell, private international law. And as I like to say, we live in a world of private international law because everything we do, almost everything we do as a citizen, a member of a family, or as a commercial operator, very quickly has a relationship to more than one legal systems, and then you need to answer these private national law questions that I have identified.
So you're hosting the conference here. As I understand it, African countries haven't been as well represented as some other countries. Is there a particular reason as to why that's been the case? Why African countries have been underrepresented at the Hague Conference on Private International Law?
So first of all, you're right. The figures speak a clear language. We have 91 members of the organization as we speak. Only 8 of these are African states. We have 156 states in total that are connected to the work of the HCCH, because you don't necessarily need to be a member of the organization to join one of our conventions, and we only have 31 African states that are otherwise connected to the work of the HCCH. So yes, the African states are underrepresented. That's a fact. And we need to change that. And we want to change that. We want to really increase the African voice and strengthen the African voice within the organization. And we are developing strategies to that effect. But to come back to your question as to why this may be the case, I think really the starting point is the lack of visibility of the organization itself, the HCCH. We're a very small organization. We are not even 30 people based in The Hague. The budget of the organization is fairly modest, given the global mandate that we have. We have a regional office in Argentina and Buenos Aires for Latin America and the Caribbean. We have a regional office in Hong Kong for Asia and Pacific. Sadly, we don't have a regional presence yet in Africa, and that is probably another reason why we lack visibility. So I am immensely grateful for the opportunity that we have today and tomorrow to talk about these issues and to talk about the work of the HCCH and the relevance of the work of the HCCH for African states, for African people, families, children, commercial operators, because it's really through these type of events that we can encourage states to sign up to some of our conventions or indeed become members of the organization.
Dr. Bernasconi, it's easy to be against globalization. There are plenty of politicians who have made a good living for themselves by being against globalization. The arguments for it, though, are fairly strong. If we all agree on a set of rules, it makes it much easier. So if, for example, a business person in South Africa wants to do business in Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan belongs to your organization, so does South Africa, you have a set of rules that you agree on. You don't need to worry about, what could happen to your assets in a foreign country. This is why it's so important. Is there still a strong case for globalization after the pandemic, after companies talking about nearshoring? Do you think the case for globalization is as strong as it used to be for your organization?
I think so, absolutely, definitely. And, we will be back to levels pre-pandemic when it comes to global trade and movement of people, movement of goods, movement of capitals. So private national law is definitely here to stay and to continue to be of immense relevance. And that's why we also need to have Africa on board when we develop these new instruments, the new conventions in the future. We don't know yet what exactly these will be, but it is important that the organization be truly universal and be truly inclusive, and that also the African expertise, because there is strong African expertise on private national law, is represented around the table, that you can make sure that your interests are being addressed effectively, and that the African voice is being heard within the organization. When my colleagues come to Africa and talk about our work and try to promote our work, the scenario is often the same, that we start talking about the Hague Conference on Private National Law, the HCCH, we explain what we do, and after 5 minutes, our counterpart would say, That's very interesting, because we actually all have these problems. We face these issues in the family law field, child protection field, commercial transactions or what have you, transnational litigation. We just didn't know that there was this international organization, the mandate of which is precisely the unification of these rules and to develop uniform responses to all these important questions.
Dr. Bernasconi, I'm afraid
yes?
I do apologize. We are going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed. The conference, of course, taking place in Gauteng over the next couple of days. Dr. Christophe Bernasconi is the Secretary General of the Hague Conference on Private International Law. A bit of time on Google may help you out with that.